When a haunted drifter saves a lonely widow, whispers spark. Now, with an old enemy closing in, can love and truth win before time runs out? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. A week had passed since the confrontation with Silas Calder. Life in Copper Creek had slowly returned to normal, though people still whispered when Micah and Eva walked by. Some looked at them with newfound respect for standing up to a man as powerful as Silas Calder. Others watched with suspicion, wondering if the Railroad King would truly keep his word. Micah and Eva tried to settle back into their routine, but something had changed. There was a restlessness in both of them, a sense that their story in Copper Creek had reached its end. "We need to move on," Micah said one evening as they sat at their small table, sharing a simple meal of stew and bread. "Your father may have agreed to leave us alone, but his shadow still hangs over this place." Eva nodded, pushing her food around her plate. "I've been thinking the same thing. Everyone here knows who I am now. They'll always see me as Evangeline Calder, not Eva Boone." "Where should we go?" Micah asked. Eva's eyes brightened with sudden inspiration. "West," she said. "To the ocean. You said once that everyone should see the ocean at least once in their life." Micah smiled, remembering that conversation in the hayloft, which seemed a lifetime ago. "The ocean it is then." They spent the next few days preparing for their journey. Old Man Jenkins was sorry to see them go, but understood their reasons. "Man's got to find his own place in the world," he said, pressing a small bag of coins into Micah's hand, despite his protests. "Consider it payment for keeping the stable running while I was laid up. Martha from the general store gave them extra supplies for their journey. You two got more courage than most folks I know," she told Eva. "Standing up to a man like Silas Calder takes guts." Word of their departure spread quickly through the small town. On the morning they were set to leave, several townspeople gathered to see them off. "You've got friends here," the blacksmith told Micah, shaking his hand. "If you ever need a place to come back to." It was a simple gesture, but it meant everything to Micah and Eva. They had found acceptance in this tiny community, something neither of them had expected when they first arrived. As the sun rose higher in the sky, they mounted their horses and rode out of Copper Creek, heading west toward the distant promise of the ocean. The road ahead was long and uncertain, but for the first time since they fled the Calder estate, they were truly free. They traveled at an easy pace, no longer running from anything but moving toward something new. At night, they camped under the stars, planning their future beside small campfires. "We could build a house near the coast," Eva said one evening, her head resting on Micah's shoulder. "Something simple, with a garden and maybe some horses." "And children?" Micah asked quietly, his arm tightening around her. Eva looked up at him, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "Yes," she said. "A boy with your gentle hands, and a girl with your thoughtful eyes." "What about your eyes?" Micah teased. "And your stubborn chin?" Eva laughed. "Those too, though I hope they don't inherit my father's temper." The mention of Silas Calder no longer brought tension between them. It was as if the confrontation in the railcar had laid those ghosts to rest. Eva still wore the pearl earrings she had had since childhood, a gift from her mother, but the rest of her past she had left behind. On the third day of their journey, they reached the county line. It was marked by a simple wooden sign and a bridge that spanned a wide, fast-flowing river. "This is it," Micah said as they paused their horses at the bridge's edge. "Once we cross, we're beyond your father's territory." Eva nodded, a mix of emotions crossing her face. "The boundary of my old life," she said softly. She reached up and touched her pearl earrings, the last remnant of Evangeline Calder. They had been her mother's once, the only thing Eva had taken when she fled her father's house. With deliberate movements, she removed them, holding them in her palm for a long moment. The pearls gleamed in the sunlight, smooth and perfect like the life she had left behind. "I don't need these anymore," she said, rising in her stirrups. With a swift motion, she tossed the earrings into the rushing water below. Micah watched as the pearls disappeared beneath the surface, carried away by the current. "Are you sure?" he asked. "They were your mother's." "My mother would understand," Eva said, settling back in her saddle. "She married for love too, remember? against her family's wishes. She smiled at Micah. Besides, I have something far more precious now. She held up her wrist, where the braided leather bracelet Micah had made still circled her slender arm. It was worn now, darkened by sun and work, but she wore it like the finest jewelry. This means more to me than all the pearls in the world, she said, because you made it with your own hands, because it was a promise. Micah leaned over from his horse and took her hand, bringing it to his lips. A promise I intend to keep for the rest of my life, he said. Together they urged their horses forward, crossing the bridge that separated one world from another. On the far side, they paused, looking back at the county they were leaving behind. Do you have any regrets? Micah asked, watching Ava's face carefully. She shook her head. Not one, she said. Everything I want is right here beside me. They rode on, following the road that wound through rolling hills covered in wildflowers. By midday, they stopped to rest in a meadow beside a clear stream. Shiva spread a blanket while Micah tended to the horses. What do you think the ocean will be like? She asked as they shared bread and cheese in the dappled shade of a tall oak. Vast, Micah said. Endless blue as far as the eye can see. The smell, herb salt in the air, waves that never stop moving. It sounds wonderful, Eva said, her eyes bright with anticipation. Not as wonderful as watching you see it for the first time, Micah replied. After their meal, they lay side by side on the blanket, watching clouds drift across the sky. A peaceful silence settled between them, the kind that comes only to people who are completely comfortable with each other. I've been thinking, Micah said after a while. About what? About names, he said, turning on his side to look at her. You're not Evangeline Calder anymore, but sometimes I wonder if you're really Eva Boone either. She frowned slightly, puzzled. What do you mean? Eva was the name you gave me when you were pretending to be someone you weren't, Micah explained. Evangeline was the name your father gave you, tying you to his world and his expectations. He traced her cheek with gentle fingers. So I've been wondering, who are you now, really, now that you're free of all that? Ava considered the question, her eyes thoughtful. It was true that both names carried echoes of her past, one of deception, however well-intentioned, and one of the gilded cage she had escaped. I don't know, she admitted. I've never had the chance to discover who I really am, to choose my own name. Micah pulled her close, his forehead touching hers. So what should I call you now? He asked softly. Eva smiled through sudden tears. Call me yours, she whispered. The simple words hung in the air between them, more binding than any vow, more true than any name. Micah kissed her then, a kiss that sealed her words in both their hearts. When they broke apart, both were smiling. Mine, Micah said, as if testing the name on his tongue. My wife, my heart. Yours, she confirmed, now and always. They continued their journey westward, taking their time, enjoying the freedom of the open road. Along the way, they passed through small towns and settlements, sometimes staying for a day or two to earn money for supplies. Micah found work shoeing horses or helping farmers with their livestock. Eva took in sewing or helped in kitchens. No one in these distant places had heard of Silas Calder or his missing daughter. They were simply Mr. and Mrs. Boone, a young couple traveling west to see the ocean. In a town called Silver Springs, they stayed for nearly 2 weeks. The local blacksmith had broken his arm, and Micah's skills with horses were in high demand. They rented a small room above the general store and settled into a temporary routine. One evening, as Ava was washing dishes after their meal, she suddenly felt dizzy. The room seemed to tilt around her, and she grabbed the edge of the basin. To steady herself, Ava. Micah was at her side in an instant, his arm around her waist. What's wrong? I don't know, she said, her voice faint. I just felt strange for a moment, like the floor was moving. Micah helped her to a chair, his face creased with worry. You've been tired lately, he said. Maybe we've been pushing too hard. Eva shook her head. It's not that. A thought struck her, and her hand moved instinctively to her stomach. Micah, she said slowly, I think I might be carrying a child. Micah's eyes widened. A baby? Our baby? Eva nodded, a smile spreading across her face despite her lingering dizziness. I'm not certain, but it's been 2 months since... My monthly time. And I've been feeling different. Tired in the mornings. Certain smells make me queasy. Micah fell to his knees beside her chair, his hands covering hers where they rested on her still flat stomach. "A child," he whispered, awe in his voice. "Our child. Are you happy?" Eva asked, suddenly uncertain. They had talked about children, but always as a distant future, after they had settled somewhere, built a life. "Happy?" Micah repeated. "Eva, I've never been happier in my life." He looked up at her, his eyes shining. "But this changes things. We can't keep traveling, not with you carrying a child. We need to find a place to settle, a real home." Eva nodded. "The ocean will still be there," she said, "after the baby comes." "No," Micah said firmly. "You wanted to see the ocean, and see it you shall. We'll just have to find a place there, a town by the sea where we can build our home." He stood, pulling her gently to her feet. "Our child should be born within sight of the ocean you've dreamed of." They left Silver Springs 2 days later, heading west with renewed purpose. They traveled more slowly now, stopping often to rest. Micah hovered over Eva, watching for any sign of discomfort or fatigue. "I'm not made of glass," she would tease when his protectiveness became too much. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time." "Not my baby," Micah would reply. "Not your baby. This one is special." As they traveled, they began to hear stories of a town called Pacific Haven, a growing settlement on the coast that welcomed newcomers. It was said to be a place where a man's past didn't matter, only his willingness to work hard and contribute to the community. "It sounds perfect," Eva said when a fellow traveler described it to them. "How far is it?" "Another week's journey. If the weather holds," the man told them. "My brother settled there last year. Says it's the finest place he's ever lived." They set their course for Pacific Haven, hope growing with each mile. Perhaps this would be the place where they could finally put down roots, where their child could grow up free from the shadow of the colder name. 6 days into their journey toward the coast, they made camp beside a small lake. The air had a different quality here, Eva noticed, fresher somehow, with a hint of something new. "Salt," Micah told her when she mentioned it. "We're getting close to the ocean. You can smell it in the air." That night, as they sat beside their campfire, Eva felt the baby move for the first time, a faint flutter like butterfly wings inside her. She gasped, grabbing Micah's hand and placing it on her slightly rounded belly. "I don't feel anything," he said, disappointed. "It's too early for that," she laughed. "But I felt it. Our baby moved, Micah." He kept his hand on her stomach anyway, as if by sheer will he could sense the tiny life growing inside her. "Do you think it's a boy or a girl?" he asked. "I don't know," Eva replied. "What do you hope for?" Micah considered the question seriously. "A girl," he said finally, "with your courage and your smile." "I was thinking a boy," Eva said, "with your gentle heart and strong hands." "Either way," Micah said, "this child will be loved, more loved than any child has ever been." The next morning dawned bright and clear. They packed up their camp and continued westward, following a trail that wound through a forest of tall pines. By midday, the trees began to thin, and the land sloped gently downward. And then suddenly, as they crested a hill, there it was, the ocean, stretching out before them in endless blue, meeting the sky at a horizon so distant it seemed like the edge of the world. Eva reined in her horse, her breath catching in her throat. "Oh, Micah," she whispered, "it's more beautiful than I ever imagined." The vastness of it was overwhelming. The way the sunlight danced on the water, creating a path of gold that seemed to lead to forever. The sound of waves breaking against the distant shore, a rhythm as old as time itself. "Can we go closer?" she asked, her voice filled with wonder. They rode down toward the shoreline, where the forest gave way to sandy dunes covered in waving grass. The sound of the waves grew louder, a constant rushing that filled the air with its music. Finally, they reached the beach itself, a wide expanse of sand that stretched in both directions as far as they could see. They dismounted, leaving the horses ground-tied in the grass, and walked together to the water's edge. Eva removed her boots and stockings, lifting her skirt slightly as she stepped into the cool water. The sensation of wet sand beneath her feet, of the water rushing around her ankles, made her laugh with pure delight. "It's wonderful," she cried, turning to Micah with shining eyes. "It's everything I dreamed it would be." Micah watched her, his heart so full it seemed it might burst. This was what he had wanted to give her from the moment she told him she had never seen the ocean. This joy, this freedom, this moment of pure happiness. Eva splashed in the shallows like a child, her hair coming loose from its pins and blowing in the salty breeze. Then she stopped suddenly, her hand going to her stomach. "The baby kicked again," she said, looking down at the water swirling around her ankles, as if saying hello to the ocean. Micah joined her in the water, slipping his arm around her waist. "Welcome home, little one," he said to her belly. "This is where your story begins." They stood together at the edge of the continent, with the vast Pacific before them and the wide country they had crossed behind them. The past was behind them too. Evangeline Calder, with her pearls and silks, the stable hand who had lost his brother in the war, the railroad empire built on power and control. Here, with the endless rhythm of the waves as witness, they were simply themselves, a man and a woman, a family soon to be 3. "Do you see that?" Micah asked, pointing down the coastline to where a cluster of buildings was visible on a bluff overlooking the ocean. "Pacific Haven?" Eva guessed. Micah nodded. "Our new home," he said, "if you like it." "I already love it," Eva replied. "I loved it before I ever saw it." They returned to their horses and rode along the beach toward the town. As they drew closer, they could see that it was larger than they had expected. A proper town with a main street, a church steeple visible above, the rooftops, fishing boats bobbing in a protected cove. "It's perfect," Eva said as they rode up the path that led from the beach to the town. People nodded to them as they passed, friendly faces curious about the newcomers, but not overly so. No one here would know the name Calder. No one would care that Micah had once been a stable hand or that Eva had run away from a fortune. They found the town's only hotel, a modest building with clean rooms and a view of the harbor. After settling in, they explored the town, talking to shopkeepers and fishermen, getting a feel for the place that might become their home. "There's land for sale just north of town," the hotel owner told them over dinner in the small dining room. "Good soil, access to fresh water, and a view of the ocean that can't be beat. Owner's asking a fair price too." The next day, they rode out to see the property. It was everything the hotel owner had promised. 5 acres of gently sloping land that ran from a stand of pine trees down to a cliff overlooking a private cove. A small cabin stood near the trees, weathered but sound. "What do you think?" Micah asked as they stood on the cliff, the wind from the ocean blowing Eva's hair around her face. She turned to him, her eyes reflecting the blue of the sea below. "I think we've found our home," she said. The owner, an older man eager to return east to be near his grandchildren, accepted their offer without haggling. With the money Jenkins had given them and what they had saved from their work along the way, they had just enough to buy the land outright. "The cabin needs work," Micah acknowledged as they walked through it after signing the papers. "But it's a good start. We can add on as our family grows." Eva moved to the small window that faced the ocean. "Our child will grow up hearing the waves," she said, her hand resting on her stomach, "watching the sun set over the water every evening." "Free," Micah added, coming to stand behind her, his arms encircling her and their unborn child. "Free to be whoever they want to be." That night, they slept in their new home for the first time. The cabin was simple, just one room with a small stove, a table, 2 chairs, and a narrow bed, but it was theirs, their first real home. As moonlight spilled through the window, painting silver patterns on the rough wooden floor, Eva turned in Micah's arms to face him. "I've been thinking about dames again," she said. "Oh?" Micah raised an eyebrow. "And what have you decided?" "For the baby," she clarified. "If it's a boy, I'd like to call him Joshua, after your brother." Micah's breath caught in his throat. "You would do that?" Eva nodded. "Your brother was a good man who died fighting for what he believed in. I'd be proud for our son to carry his name." "And if it's a girl?" Micah asked, his voice thick with emotion. Eva smiled. "Hope," she said, "because that's what she'll be. Our hope for the future." Micah pulled her closer, burying his face in her hair to hide the tears that threatened. "Joshua or Hope," he murmured. "Perfect names for our child." "Our child," Eva repeated, the words a prayer and a promise. Outside, the waves continued their endless rhythm against the shore below the cliff. Inside, in the small cabin that would soon be filled with the sounds of family, a man and woman held each other close, their hearts beating as one. They had crossed mountains and rivers, faced down power and wealth, left behind the only worlds they had ever known, all for the chance to write their own story, to be called by the names they chose for themselves. And as they drifted toward sleep, wrapped in each other's arms with the sound of the ocean as their lullaby, they knew that the greatest journey was just beginning, a journey called home. 2. Weeks had passed since Colt Jarrett had rescued Delilah from the Coyotes. Her ankle was healing well, but she found herself hoping it would take a little longer. Having Colt around had changed things at the Mercer Ranch. The air felt lighter somehow. Each morning Delilah would watch from the porch as Colt rode out with the other ranch hands. Each evening they would share dinner and then sit together on the porch, talking as the stars appeared overhead. "You're good with the men," Delilah observed one evening. "Thomas says you've taught them a few tricks with the cattle." Colt shrugged. "I've worked a lot of different ranches. You pick things up." "Where did you learn so much about horses?" she asked. "Even Morgan, who's been breaking horses for 20 years, says you have a special touch." A small smile played at the corner of Colt's mouth. "Had a wise old cowboy teach me when I was just a kid. Said horses can smell fear and lies, so there's no point in trying either with them." Delilah laughed. "Sounds like good advice for dealing with people too." "People are more complicated," Colt said, his expression growing serious. "Horses don't. Judge your past." Delilah wanted to ask what he meant, but the shuttered look in his eyes warned her not to push. Instead, she changed the subject. "I need to go into town tomorrow for supplies. Would you mind driving me? My ankle's still not strong." "Enough for the stirrup." "Of course," Colt said. "Been meaning to pick up a few things myself." Marrow Bend was a small town, but it served as the main trading post for the surrounding ranches. As Colt drove the wagon down the main street with Delilah beside him, heads turned. "Folks are staring," Colt noted, keeping his voice low. "They always stare at me," Delilah said with a sigh. "The rich widow is always good for gossip." They stopped in front of the general store. Colt jumped down and came around to help Delilah. His hands were strong and steady as he lifted her from the wagon. "Thank you," she said, suddenly aware of how close they were standing. "Mrs. Mercer," a shrill voice called out. "What a surprise to see you in town." Delilah turned to see Beatrice Holloway approaching, her sharp eyes taking in every detail of Colt's appearance. "Hello, Beatrice," Delilah said politely. "How are you?" "Just fine, dear. And who might this be?" Beatrice's gaze fixed on Colt like a hawk spotting a field mouse. "This is Colt Jarrett," Delilah said. "He's working at the ranch temporarily." Beatrice's eyebrows rose. "Is he now? Well, that's interesting." She turned to Colt with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Welcome to Marrow Bend, Mr. Jarrett. We don't get many new faces around here." Colt tipped his hat but said nothing. "Will you be staying long?" Beatrice pressed. "Just helping out while Mrs. Mercer's ankle heals," Colt replied. "How thoughtful," Beatrice said, her tone suggesting she thought it was anything but. She turned back to Delilah. "You must join us for tea at the church social next week, dear. It's been too long." "Thank you for the invitation," Delilah said. "I'll try to make it." With another calculating look at Colt, Beatrice nodded and continued on her way. "Friend of yours?" Colt asked once she was out of earshot. "Beatrice knows everyone's business in Marrow Bend," Delilah explained as they entered the store. "By supper time, the whole town will know you're staying at the ranch." "Does that bother you?" Colt asked. Delilah met his eyes. "No," she said firmly. "It doesn't." Inside the store, Mr. Peterson greeted them warmly enough, but Delilah noticed how his wife whispered to another customer, both of them glancing in her direction. Colt noticed too. "They always treat you like this?" he asked quietly as they moved through the aisles. "Ever since Richard died," Delilah admitted. "There were rumors about how it happened." The stampede, Colt recalled. Delilah nodded, her expression troubled. Some people thought it was convenient that I was the only witness. Young wife inherits everything when her much older husband dies suddenly. Colt's face darkened. People talk too much about things they don't understand. It's the way of small towns, Delilah said with a sad smile. I've learned to live with it. As they gathered their supplies, Delilah noticed a man watching them from across the store. He was a stranger, well-dressed but with a hardness about him that set him apart from the locals. Looking for something specific, mister? Colt called out, having noticed the man's stare as well. The stranger smiled thinly. Just passing through, he said, like some folks do. There was something in the way he said it that made Delilah uneasy. Colt must have felt it too because he moved closer to her, his body language protective. The stranger tipped his hat and left the store without buying anything. You know him? Delilah asked. Never seen him before, Colt said, but there was tension in his voice that hadn't been there moments ago. That night, Delilah found herself unable to sleep. The encounter with the stranger had left her with an unsettled feeling. Around midnight, she gave up trying and made her way downstairs to the kitchen for some tea. As she passed the window, she noticed a light on in Colt's cabin by the creek. On impulse, she grabbed her shawl and slipped outside. The night air was cool, and the moon cast long shadows across the yard. Delilah made her way carefully down the path to the cabin, her ankles still tender but much improved. She was about to knock when she heard Colt's voice, low and tense. Peering through the window, she saw him pacing the small room, a letter clutched in his hand. "Damn it," he muttered, running a hand through his hair. Delilah knocked softly. The movement inside stilled instantly. "Who's there?" Colt's voice was sharp. "It's Delilah." After a moment, the door opened. Colt stood there, shirt half unbuttoned, hair tousled. He looked surprised to see her. "Is everything all right?" he asked. "I saw your light," Delilah said. "I couldn't sleep and thought maybe you couldn't either." Colt hesitated, then stepped back to let her in. The cabin was simple but clean. A bed in one corner, a small table with 2 chairs, a pot-bellied stove for cooking and heat. "I don't have any tea," he said, awkwardly running a hand through his hair again. "Just coffee." "Coffee is fine," Delilah said, settling into one of the chairs. She noticed he had quickly tucked the letter into his pocket. Colt busied himself, with the coffee pot, his back to her. "Something on your mind?" he asked over his shoulder. "That man at the store today," Delilah said, "the way he looked at you. It seemed like he knew you." Colt's shoulders tensed. "Lots of drifters on the trail. Faces start to look familiar after a while." "You're not a very good liar, Colt Jarrett," Delilah said gently. He turned to face her, his expression guarded. "Some things are better left unsaid. Not between friends," Delilah countered. "Is that what we are, friends?" There was a challenge in his voice, but also something else, a vulnerability that tugged at her heart. "I'd like to think so," she said softly. Colt brought 2 cups of coffee to the table and sat across from her. For a long moment he stared into his cup as if searching for words. "I wasn't always a drifter," he finally said. "Used to have a small spread in New Mexico, nothing fancy, but it was mine. My brother and I ran it together after our father died." "What happened?" Delilah asked when he fell silent. Colt's jaw tightened. There was a dispute over water rights with a neighboring rancher. Things got heated. Words turned to threats. Threats turned to actions. He took a deep breath. "One night I was playing cards in town. The rancher came in drunk and looking for trouble. Said things about our mother that no man could let stand." Delilah reached across the table and placed her hand over his. "Go on." "I didn't mean for it to happen," Colt said, his voice rough with remembered pain. "He drew on me. I drew faster. The law called it self-defense, but his family called it murder. They swore they'd see me hang." "So you left," Delilah said softly. Colt nodded. "My brother wanted to stand and fight. I wanted to sell out and move on. We argued, haven't spoken since." He pulled the letter from his pocket and laid it on the table. "This came today. From my brother. Someone's been asking questions about me and our old town. Sounds like the dead man's brother might still be looking for revenge." "After all this time?" Delilah asked. "Some hatreds don't fade." Colt said grimly. I should move on. I've stayed here too long already. No, Delilah said, her voice stronger than she intended. You've done nothing wrong. You can't keep running. It's easier than staying, Colt said, echoing words he'd said many times before. Staying means facing things, facing people, taking routes that can be torn up. Then try it, Delilah said, her eyes locked with his. Stay. Here. With me. The words hung between them, charged with meaning. Colt's expression softened, his eyes searching hers. Delilah, he said, her name almost a whisper on his lips. You don't know what you're asking. I do, she insisted. I'm asking you to stop running. I'm asking you to give yourself a chance. To give us a chance. Us? He repeated, the word filled with both hope and doubt. These past 2 weeks, Delilah said, have been the first time since Richard died that I've felt alive again. That I've felt like more than just the widow everyone whispers about. Colt stood and moved to the window, his back to her. I've never finished anything that mattered, he said, his voice low. I've disappointed everyone who ever counted on me. My brother, my partners, myself. Delilah rose and went to him, placing a hand on his arm. I don't need perfect, she said. I just need someone who won't run when I finally stop pretending I'm not lonely. Colt turned to face her, and in his eyes Delilah saw a battle being waged. Fear against hope, the past against the possibility of a future. Slowly, he raised a hand to her cheek, his touch gentle. I can't promise anything, he said. But I'll try? For you, I'll try. Delilah leaned into his touch, her heart racing. That's all I'm asking. In the small cabin, with moonlight streaming through the window, Colt lowered his head and kissed her. It was a tentative kiss at first, questioning, but when Delilah responded, it deepened into something hungry and real. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Colt rested his forehead against hers. I should take you back to the house, he said reluctantly. Delilah nodded, though part of her wanted to stay. Tomorrow, she said, we'll figure this out together. The next morning, Delilah was in the study going through Richard's old papers when Thomas knocked on the door. Mrs. Mercer, there's a man here to see you. Says it's about Mr. Jarrett. Delilah felt a chill run through her. Show him in, please. A.E. Moment later, the stranger from the general store walked into the study. Up close, she could see the cold calculation in his eyes. Mrs. Mercer, he said with a slight bow, my name is James Blackwood. I apologize for the intrusion, but I thought you should know who you're harboring on your property. Mr. Jarrett is an employee of this ranch, Delilah said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Blackwood smiled thinly. He's also wanted in New Mexico for killing a man. Marshal Phillips sends his regards, by the way. He and I go way back. The law cleared him of that charge, Delilah said. It was self-defense. So he told you about it? Blackwood seemed surprised. Interesting. Did he also tell you about the money he took from the Phillips family, or the woman he left behind? Delilah's hands clenched in her lap. I think you should leave, Mr. Blackwood. So of course, he said smoothly, but first a business proposition. I'm authorized to offer a reward for information leading to Jarrett's, let's call it, return to justice. $500, a substantial sum. Are you a bounty hunter? So Mr. Blackwood, Delilah asked coldly. I prefer agent of justice, he replied. The offer stands. Think about it, Mrs. Mercer. A woman in your position can't afford more scandal. After he left, Delilah sat trembling with anger. She didn't believe his lies about Colt, but she knew how dangerous a man like Blackwood could be. She was still sitting there when Colt came looking for her an hour later. Delilah, he called from the doorway. Thomas said you wanted to see me. She looked up at him, her heart full. Close the door, she said. We need to talk. Colt stepped inside, his expression growing concerned when he saw her face. What's wrong? That man from the store came here, Delilah said. He says he's working for the Phillips family. He's looking for you, Colt. Colt's face hardened. Blackwood, he spat. He's a hired gun, calls himself a bounty hunter, but he's just a killer for hire. He offered me money to turn you in, Delilah said. And? Colt asked, his voice tight. Delilah stood and crossed to him. "And I told him to leave." Relief washed over Colt's face, but it quickly gave way to concern. "This is what I was afraid of. My trouble following me, touching the people I care about." "I'm not afraid," Delilah said firmly. "But we need to deal with this. You can't keep running forever." "What do you suggest?" Colt asked. "We go to Sheriff Davis," Delilah said. "Together, tell him everything. He's a fair man, and he knows the law. If you were cleared of charges in New Mexico, he'll back you against Blackwood." Colt shook his head. "It's not that simple. The Phillips family has money and influence. They could have trumped up new charges, bribed officials." "Then we'll fight it," Delilah insisted. "With the truth?" "Together." Colt looked at her with wonder. "Why would you do this for me? Risk your reputation, your peace?" "Because you're worth fighting for," Delilah said simply. "Because what's growing between us is worth fighting for." She stepped closer and took his hands in hers. "Last night, you said you'd try staying. This is part of what that means. Facing things head-on instead of running from them." Colt searched her face, as if looking for any sign of doubt or fear. Finding none, he nodded slowly. "All right," he said. "We'll do it your way. Together." Delilah smiled and squeezed his hands. "There's something else I want to show you," she said, leading him to Richard's desk. She opened a drawer and pulled out a leather-bound ledger. "Richard's journal. I've never shown it to anyone." "Why now?" Colt asked. "Because you deserve to know the truth about me too," Delilah said. "About Richard's death and why the town whispers." She opened the ledger to the last entry, dated the day before the stampede. "Read it," she said softly. Colt took the book and read aloud. "The doctor confirms what I suspected. 6 months at most. The pain is becoming unbearable. I've made arrangements with Thompson to make it look like an accident. Delilah must never know. She's been a good wife, better than I deserved. She'll be taken care of and free." He looked up at Delilah, his expression stunned. "He planned his own death?" Delilah nodded, tears in her eyes. "He had cancer. He never told me how bad it was. The stampede, it wasn't an accident, but I didn't cause it. He arranged it with his oldest friend. I found this journal a month after the funeral." "Why didn't you tell anyone?" Colt asked gently. "And tarnish his memory. Let everyone know he took his own life." Delilah shook her head. "I couldn't do that to him. So I let them whisper about me instead." Colt set the ledger down and pulled Delilah into his arms. "You carried this alone all this time?" "Until now," she said, her face pressed against his chest. "Now I've told you." "Thank you for trusting me," Colt whispered into her hair. They stood like that for a long moment, holding each other, two broken people finding strength together. "Tonight," Delilah said finally, "I'm going to burn this ledger page by page." She looked up at him, her eyes clear and determined. "That life's dead," she said. "Let's build something that breathes." Colt's answer was to lower his head and capture her lips with his. The kiss was a promise, a beginning, a declaration of intent. Outside the study window, spring sunlight bathed the Mercer Ranch in golden light. And for the first time in years, both Delilah and Colt felt the weight of their past begin to lift, replaced by the tentative hope of a future they might build together. But in town, James Blackwood was making inquiries, laying groundwork, and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The morning sun cast long shadows across the sheriff's office as Delilah and Colt walked in together. Sheriff Davis looked up from his desk, surprise registering on his weathered face. "Mrs. Mercer," he said, standing. "What can I do for you today?" His eyes shifted to Colt, taking in the stranger with a lawman's careful assessment. "Sheriff Davis, this is Colt Jarrett," Delilah said. "He's been working at my ranch, and we need to talk to you about a matter of some concern." The sheriff gestured to the chairs in front of his desk. "Have a seat." Once they were settled, Colt leaned forward. "Sheriff, a man named James Blackwood has come to town looking for me. He claims to be working for the Phillips family from New Mexico." "And why would they be looking for you, Mr. Jarrett?" Sheriff Davis asked, his tone neutral but his eyes sharp. 5 years ago, I killed a man in self-defense," Colt said bluntly. "Frank Phillips. He drew on me during a card game after threatening my family. The local law cleared me of any wrongdoing, but the Phillips family never accepted the ruling. Sheriff Davis nodded slowly. And this Blackwood, he's a bounty hunter? He calls himself that, Colt said. But he's more of a hired gun. He came to the ranch yesterday, tried to bribe Mrs. Mercer to turn me in. That true, Mrs. Mercer? The sheriff asked. Every word, Delilah confirmed. He offered me $500 and implied I should be concerned about my reputation. Sheriff, Davis's bushy eyebrows drew together. Sounds like intimidation to me. He leaned back in his chair. What exactly are you asking of me? We want to know if there are any actual charges against me, Colt said. Any legal reason why I should go with Blackwood. The sheriff considered. This. I can send a telegram to the authorities in New Mexico. Find out if there are any outstanding warrants. That'll take a few days. He looked at Delilah. In the meantime, I'd advise caution. Men like Blackwood don't usually operate within the law. Thank you, Sheriff, Delilah said, rising from her chair. We appreciate your help. As they turned to leave, Sheriff Davis called after them. Mrs. Mercer, people are talking about you. Too? Might want to be careful about that too. Delilah lifted her chin. Let them talk, Sheriff. I stopped caring about gossip a long time ago. Outside on the boardwalk, Colt took Delilah's arm. You didn't have to say that. Yes, I did. She replied firmly. I'm tired of living my life according to what others think. They walked arm in arm down the main street, well aware of the stares and whispers that followed them. Outside the general store, they ran into Beatrice Holloway and her small circle of friends. Mrs. Mercer, Beatrice said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. How progressive of you to be seen in such casual company. Mr. Jarrett is more than an employee, Beatrice, Delilah said calmly. He's a dear friend. Is that what they're calling it these days? One of Beatrice's companions muttered, just loud enough to be heard. Colt stiffened beside her, but Delilah squeezed his arm in warning. Ladies, she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, I do hope you'll join us for dinner at the ranch. Next weekend, I'm hosting a small gathering and I'd love for you all to get to know Colt better. The women exchanged startled glances. A dinner party? Beatrice repeated. At your home, with him present as what exactly? As my guest of honor, Delilah said smoothly. Saturday at 7. I do hope you can make it. Without waiting for a response, she guided Colt away, her head held high. A dinner party? Colt asked once they were out of earshot. That wasn't part of our plan. It is now, Delilah said with determination. It's time to stop hiding and face these people head on. If they're going to talk about us, let's give them something real to talk about. Back at the ranch, Delilah threw herself into preparations for the dinner party. She instructed Maria on the menu, had the dining room polished until it gleamed, and even ordered a new dress from the dressmaker in town. You're really serious about this? Colt observed as he watched her arrange flowers in the parlor. Dead serious, Delilah replied. These people have been judging me since the day I married Richard. It's time I stopped caring what they think, Colt came up behind her and placed his hands on her shoulders. And what about Blackwood? He's still in town watching and waiting. Delilah turned to face him. Let him watch. We've done nothing wrong. Once the sheriff gets confirmation that there are no charges against you, Blackwood will have no choice but to leave. You have a lot of faith in the law, Colt said, a trace of bitterness in his voice. I have faith in us, Delilah corrected him. In what we're building together. That evening, as promised, they burned Richard's ledger page by page in the fireplace. As the last page curled and blackened in the flames, Delilah felt a weight lift from her shoulders. No more secrets, she said softly. Colt pulled her close. No more running, he agreed. The night of the dinner party arrived and the Mercer ranch was transformed. Lanterns lined the driveway and the house glowed with warmth and light. Delilah wore her new dress, a deep blue that brought out the color of her eyes, and had her hair styled in a way she hadn't worn it since before Richard's death. When Colt saw her descending the staircase, he stood speechless at the bottom. You look beautiful, he finally managed to say. Delilah smiled. And you clean up rather nicely yourself, Mr. Jarrett. Colt tugged at his borrowed suit jacket, looking uncomfortable but handsome. This isn't really me, he admitted. Just for tonight, Delilah promised, straightening his tie. Tomorrow you can go back to being my rugged cowboy. The guests began to arrive. Beatrice and her husband, the banker Mr. Holloway, Dr. and Mrs. Williams, the mayor and his wife, and several other prominent citizens of Marrow Bend. They were all curiosity and polite smiles, eager to see what scandal might unfold. Delilah greeted each one graciously, with Colt at her side. She introduced him not as her employee, but simply as Colt Jarrett, letting the ambiguity of their relationship hang in the air. Dinner was served in the formal dining room, with Maria's finest cooking and wine from Richard's cellar. Conversation flowed, stilted at first, but warming as the wine did its work. "So, Mr. Jarrett," Beatrice said during a lull in the conversation, "Delilah tells us you're from New Mexico originally. What brought you to our little corner of the world?" Colt met her gaze steadily. "Fate, Mrs. Holloway. I was tracking a mountain lion when I happened upon Mrs. Mercer in trouble. Sometimes life takes unexpected turns." "Indeed it does," Dr. Williams said, raising his glass. "To unexpected turns and new beginnings." The toast was echoed around the table, though some with more enthusiasm than others. As dessert was being served, the conversation turned to local matters, the drought affecting the western pastures, the new schoolteacher arriving next month, the proposed railway spur that might bring more business to Marrow Bend. "Speaking of business," Mr. Holloway said, turning to Delilah, "have you given any more thought to selling the north section of your property? Carson is still very interested." "I'm not selling any part of the Mercer Ranch," Delilah said firmly. "In fact, I'm considering expanding our operation." This announcement caused a stir among the guests. "Expanding?" Mayor Thompson asked. "That's a bold move for a woman alone." "Mrs. Mercer is hardly alone," Colt said quietly, his eyes on Delilah. "And she's more than capable of running this ranch." The way he looked at her, with pride and something deeper, silenced the table momentarily. "Well," Beatrice said with a tight smile, "it seems you've found yourself quite the advocate, Delilah." "I have indeed," Delilah agreed, returning Colt's gaze with equal warmth. The party broke up soon after, the guests departing with forced smiles and whispered comments. As the last carriage pulled away, Delilah and Colt stood on the porch, watching the lantern lights disappear down the drive. "That went better than I expected," Delilah said, leaning against Colt's side. "They still don't approve," Colt pointed out. "No," Delilah agreed, "but they know now that I don't care. And that's liberating." Colt turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "You were magnificent tonight, standing up to them, being proud of who you are and what you want." "And what do I want, Colt Jarrett?" Delilah asked softly. "A future," he said, his voice low and certain. "A life that's truly yours, someone who sees you for who you are, not what you represent." "And you?" she prompted. "What do you want?" Colt's hands tightened on hers. "Something I never thought I'd have, a home, a purpose." He paused, his eyes searching hers. "Someone to love who loves me back, despite my past." Delilah's heart swelled. "You have that," she whispered. "You have me." He lowered his head and kissed her, a kiss that held promise and passion and possibility. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathless. "Stay with me tonight," Delilah said, her eyes never leaving his. "Not in the cabin. Here with me." Colt's answer was to kiss her again, then sweep her into his arms and carry her into the house, the door closing behind them on the watching world. Dawn was just breaking when Colt slipped from Delilah's bed, careful not to wake her. He stood for a moment, watching her sleep, her face peaceful and her hair spread across the pillow. He dressed quietly and made his way downstairs, intending to check on the horses before the rest of the ranch woke up. As he stepped onto the porch, he froze. A man was sitting in one of the rocking chairs, a cup of coffee in his hand. "Morning, little brother," the man said, his voice a deeper version of Colt's own. "Been a while." "Matthew," Colt said, shock giving way to wariness. "What are you doing here?" Matthew Jarrett stood, setting aside his coffee cup. He was taller than Colt by a few inches, with the same dark hair but grey eyes instead of blue. "Got your letter," he said. Thought it might be time we had a talk face to face. Colt glanced back at the house, then motioned for his brother to follow him toward the stables. Once they were out of earshot of the house, he turned to face Matthew. "I didn't write you any letter," Colt said. "I got one from you, warning me about Blackwood." Matthew's expression hardened. "I didn't write any letter either. Looks like someone wanted to get us both here." "Blackwood," Colt guessed. "But why?" "Because he knows I'm the only one who can testify about what really happened with Frank Phillips," Matthew said grimly. "The new charges they've trumped up against you include robbery and kidnapping. They're saying you took Phillips's money and his sister after the shooting." Colt swore under his breath. "That's a lie. I never touched his money, and Sarah Phillips left town of her own free will." "You and I know that," Matthew agreed. "But the Phillips family has been spreading a different story. They've got the local marshal in their pocket now, and he's issued new warrants." "That's why Blackwood's here," Colt realized. "He's got legal backing to take me in." Matthew nodded. "And he used me to flush you out. He must have followed me here." Colt ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "I need to talk to Sheriff Davis. If there are new warrants, he needs to know." "Won't matter," Matthew said. "Blackwood will have the paperwork. It'll all look legal, even if it's based on lies." "Then I'll go back and face the charges," Colt said. "Clear my name properly this time." Matthew shook his head. "You won't get a fair trial, not with the Phillips family controlling things. They want revenge, not justice." "I can't keep running," Colt insisted. "Not anymore. Not now." Matthew studied his brother's face. "Because of the woman, the widow who owns this place?" "Delilah," Colt said, her name soft on his lips. "And yes, because of her, but also because I'm tired of looking over my shoulder, tired of never having a home." Matthew was silent for a long moment. "I'm sorry," he finally said, "about how things ended between us. I was angry, felt like you were abandoning the ranch, abandoning me. I thought I was protecting you," Colt admitted, "keeping my troubles from becoming yours." "We're brothers," Matthew said simply. "Your troubles are mine, whether I want them or not." He sighed. "And now I've led those troubles right to your door." "Not your fault," Colt said. "Blackwood planned this." "So what now?" Matthew asked. Before Colt could answer, they heard the sound of horses approaching. A moment later, Sheriff Davis rode into the yard, accompanied by a deputy. "Colt Jarrett?" the sheriff called out, dismounting stiffly. "Got a response to my telegram?" His expression was grave. "We need to talk." Colt stepped forward, Matthew at his side. "This is my brother, Matthew Jarrett," he said. "He just arrived with news of his own." Sheriff Davis nodded to Matthew, then turned back to Colt. "The news isn't good, I'm afraid. There are new warrants out for your arrest in New Mexico. Serious charges, robbery, kidnapping." "They're false charges," Colt said, "trumped up by the Phillips family." "That may be," the sheriff acknowledged, "but they're legal warrants. If Blackwood has copies, which I suspect he does, I'll have no choice but to honor them." "And if I resist?" Colt asked quietly. Sheriff Davis's face softened slightly. "Don't make this harder than it has to be, son. Mrs. Mercer's already had enough scandal in her life." The mention of Delilah made Colt's chest tighten. "I need to talk to her before anything happens." "Of course," the sheriff agreed. "But I'd advise you to do it soon. Blackwood was in my office when the telegram came in. He knows about the warrants." As if summoned by his name, James Blackwood rode into the yard, accompanied by two hard-looking men. He smiled coldly when he saw the gathering. "Well, this is convenient," he said, dismounting smoothly. "The Jarrett brothers reunited at last, and Sheriff Davis too. Saves me having to make multiple stops." "Blackwood?" Sheriff Davis said with a nod. "I was just informing Mr. Jarrett about the warrants." "Warrants based on lies," Matthew interjected angrily. Blackwood's smile didn't waver. "The law is the law, Mr. Jarrett. Your brother will be returning to New Mexico to face justice. You're welcome to come along. I believe they have questions. For you as well." "This isn't justice," Colt said, his voice tight with anger. "This is a vendetta." "Call it what you like," Blackwood replied with a shrug. "You're still coming with me." The tension in the yard was broken by Delilah's voice from the porch. "No, he's not." All heads turned to see her standing there, a shotgun in her hands. She was still in her robe, her hair loose around her shoulders, but her stance was determined. "Mrs. Mercer," Sheriff Davis said cautiously, "put the gun down. This is a legal matter." "There's nothing legal about persecuting an innocent man," Delilah said, walking down the steps toward them. "Colt was cleared of the original charges. These new ones are obviously fabricated." Blackwood's eyes narrowed. "Careful, Mrs. Mercer. Interfering with an officer of the law is a serious offense." "You're no officer," Delilah retorted. "You're a hired thug." "Delilah," Colt said, moving toward her, "please, put the gun down. This isn't the way." She looked at him, her eyes filled with fear and determination. "I won't let them take you." "Listen to him, Mrs. Mercer," Sheriff Davis urged. "There are better ways to resolve this." Delilah hesitated, then slowly lowered the shotgun. Colt reached her side and gently took it from her hands. "We'll fight this," he promised her quietly. "But not like this," Blackwood smirked. "How touching. Now, if the drama is over, I have a job to do." He pulled a set of handcuffs from his coat. "Wait," Matthew said suddenly. "I have evidence that can clear my brother. Papers signed by Sarah Phillips herself stating that she left town willingly and that Colt never took any money." Blackwood's smile faltered. "That won't matter. The warrants have been issued." "It will matter to a judge," Sheriff Davis said thoughtfully. "Especially if the witness statements contradict the charges." "I need time to get those papers," Matthew said. "They're hidden at our old ranch." "Convenient," Blackwood sneered. "But I'm not waiting. Jarrett comes with me now." "Then I'm going with him," Delilah declared. "All the way to New Mexico if necessary, and I'll hire the best lawyers money can." "Bye." Colt looked at her in amazement. "Delilah, you can't do that." "I can and I will," she said fiercely. "I'm not losing you, Colt Jarrett. Not to lies and not to fear." Sheriff Davis cleared his throat. "There might be a compromise here," he suggested. "Mr. Jarrett surrenders to my custody, not Blackwood's. He stays in the Marrow Bend jail while his brother retrieves this evidence. If it's compelling, I'll wire the judge in New Mexico myself." "That's not acceptable," Blackwood protested. "My orders are to bring him back immediately." "Your orders don't supersede my authority in this town," Sheriff Davis said firmly. "As long as Jarrett is in my jurisdiction, I decide how this is handled." Blackwood's hand drifted toward his gun. "I wouldn't advise resistance, Sheriff." "And I wouldn't advise threatening a sheriff in his own town," Davis replied calmly, "especially not with witnesses present." The standoff stretched for a tense moment. Then Blackwood relaxed his stance, though his eyes remained cold. "3 days," he said. "I'll give you 3 days to produce this supposed evidence. Then Jarrett comes with me one way or another." Sheriff Davis nodded. "Fair enough." "Colt," Delilah said, her voice breaking slightly, "you can't go to jail, not even here." Colt turned to her, taking her hands in his. "It's the best option we have right now," he said gently. "It gives Matthew time to get the evidence, and it keeps things peaceful." "I'll come visit you," she promised. "Every day." "I know you will," he said with a sad smile. "And when this is over, we'll start fresh. No more looking back." Delilah reached up and touched his face. "Promise me you won't give up. Promise me you'll fight for us, I promise," Colt said, his voice rough with emotion. Sheriff Davis approached, looking apologetic. "Time to go, Jarrett." Colt nodded and gave Delilah's hands one last squeeze before letting go. As he walked toward the sheriff's horse, Matthew called after him. "I'll ride out today," he promised. "Be back as soon as I can." Colt nodded to his brother, a silent understanding passing between them. Then he mounted up behind the sheriff, his eyes never leaving Delilah as they rode away. Blackwood lingered, watching Delilah with calculating eyes. "He'll still end up hanging," he said conversationally. "Evidence or no evidence. The Phillips family wants blood." "Get off my property," Delilah said coldly. Blackwood tipped his hat mockingly. "As you wish, Mrs. Mercer, but remember my offer. $500 is a lot of money for a woman alone." "I'm not alone," Delilah replied. "And Colt is worth more than all the money in the world." After Blackwood and his men had ridden away, Matthew approached Delilah cautiously. "Mrs. Mercer," he said, "I want to thank you for standing by my brother. He's never had anyone fight for him like that before." Delilah studied Colt's brother, seeing the family resemblance but also the differences. Matthew seemed harder, more weathered by life's disappointments. "Do you really have evidence that can help him?" she asked directly. Matthew nodded. "Sarah Phillips and I were close. When she left town, she gave me a signed statement about what really happened. I kept it hidden, never thinking I'd need it." "Then, you'd better ride fast, Mr. Jarrett," Delilah said. "We have 3 days to save your brother." As Matthew mounted his horse, Delilah called after him, "Bring him home to me." Matthew touched the brim of his hat in a gesture reminiscent of his brother. "Yes, ma'am. That's exactly what I intend to do." Standing alone in the yard, watching the dust settle, Delilah felt a mixture of fear and determination. 3 days. 3 days to save the man she loved. 3 days that would determine the rest of their lives. In town, Colt sat in a cell in the Marrow Bend jail, staring at the wall. But in his mind he was already planning. If Matthew didn't return in time, if the evidence wasn't enough, he would have a decision to make: flee again to protect himself, or stay and fight for the chance at a life with Delilah. As night fell, over Marrow Bend, the moon rose large and bright, casting silver light over the town and the distant ranch. In its glow, a lone rider pushed his horse hard to the west, racing against time and fate to bring back the truth that might save his brother. The first day of Colt's imprisonment passed slowly. Delilah arrived at the jail early in the morning, bringing fresh clothes and a basket of food prepared by Maria. Sheriff Davis led her into the cell area with a sympathetic nod. "10 minutes, Mrs. Mercer. That's all I can allow." Colt stood when he saw her, his face lighting up despite their circumstances. "You didn't have to come." "Of course I did," Delilah said, passing the basket through the bars. "How are you holding up?" "I've been in worse places," Colt said with a wry smile. "Sheriff Davis is a decent man, brought me coffee this morning." Delilah reached through the bars to take his hand. "Matthew left yesterday. He promised to ride fast." "Matthew's always been a man of his word," Colt said. "If anyone can get that evidence back in time, it's him." "And if he doesn't?" Delilah asked, voicing the fear that had kept her awake all night. Colt's grip on her hand tightened. "Then we'll face whatever comes together." "I'm not running anymore, Delilah. I meant what I said." "Blackwood's still in town," she told him. "I saw him at the saloon when I passed. He's watching and waiting." "He's dangerous," Colt warned. "Don't confront him again. Promise me." Before Delilah could answer, Sheriff Davis returned. "Time's up, Mrs. Mercer." "I'll be back tomorrow," Delilah promised, reluctantly letting go of Colt's hand. "I'll be here," Colt replied with a sad smile. As Delilah left the jail, she noticed James Blackwood across the street, leaning against a hitching post. He tipped his hat mockingly. "Visiting hours already over, Mrs. Mercer," he called. Delilah ignored him and continued walking, her head held high. She had errands to run in town, supplies to purchase and a visit to make. The law office of Harold Jenkins was small but tidy. The lawyer looked up in surprise when Delilah entered. "Mrs. Mercer," he said, rising from his desk. "This is unexpected. What can I do for you?" "I need legal advice, Mr. Jenkins," Delilah said, taking a seat. "About extradition laws and false charges." The lawyer's eyebrows rose. "I assume this is about Mr. Jarrett." "News travels fast," Delilah observed. "It's a small town," Jenkins replied. "And you made quite a statement at your dinner party." Delilah met his gaze steadily. "I care for him, Mr. Jenkins, and I believe he's innocent of these new charges." Jenkins nodded thoughtfully. "Well, legally speaking, if there are valid warrants, Sheriff Davis has limited options. However, if you can prove the charges are fabricated—" "His brother is bringing evidence," Delilah explained. "Letters from Sarah Phillips herself, stating that she left town willingly and that Colt never stole any money. That could help." Jenkins agreed. "But it might not be enough on its own. You'd need to challenge the warrants directly in New Mexico." "How would I do that?" Delilah asked. "Hire a lawyer there, file motions. It would take time and money." "I have both," Delilah said firmly, "and I want you to start the process immediately." Jenkins studied her for a moment. "You really do care for him, don't you?" "More than I thought possible," Delilah admitted. "He's a good man who's been dealt a bad hand. I won't let him face this alone." "Very well," Jenkins said, reaching for a sheet of paper. "Let's get started." The second day dawned with no sign of Matthew. Delilah spent the morning at the ranch, handling business matters and instructing Thomas to prepare the cabin by the creek for Matthew's return. In town, tension was building. Blackwood and his men had taken over the saloon, drinking heavily and making veiled threats about what would happen when they took Colt back to New Mexico. Sheriff Davis had deputized 2 local men to help guard the jail, worried that Blackwood might try to take matters into his own hands. When Delilah arrived for her daily visit, she found the sheriff looking tired and concerned. "Everything all right, Sheriff?" she asked. "Just keeping an eye on Blackwood," he replied. "He's getting impatient and drunk." Inside the cell area, Colt paced like a caged animal. He stopped when he saw Delilah. "Any word from Matthew?" he asked immediately. Delilah shook her head. "Not yet, but there's still time." Colt ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "He should have been back by now. Something's wrong." "Don't think like that," Delilah urged. "The weather's been good, the trail's clear. He'll make it." "And if he doesn't?" Colt asked. "Blackwood won't wait forever, and I won't risk you getting hurt when he loses patience." Delilah reached through the bars to touch his face. "I've hired Mr. Jenkins to start legal proceedings. If we have to, we'll fight the charges properly in court." Colt covered her hand with his. "That could take months, years even." "Then that's how long it takes," Delilah said firmly. "I'm not giving up on you, Colt Jarrett. Not now, not ever." The intensity in her eyes made Colt's breath catch. "I don't deserve you," he said softly. "Yes, you do," Delilah replied. "We deserve each other. We deserve a chance at happiness." As they spoke, Sheriff Davis rushed in, his expression urgent. "Mrs. Mercer, you need to leave, now." "What's happening?" Colt demanded, instantly alert. "Blackwood and his men are heading this way," the sheriff explained. "They're drunk and looking for trouble. I don't want Mrs. Mercer caught in the middle." "Go," Colt urged Delilah. "Please." "I'll be back," she promised, squeezing his hand one last time before hurrying out the back door of the jail. She hadn't gone far when she heard shouting from the street. Ignoring Colt's warning, she made her way around to the front of the building, staying hidden in the shadows of the alley. Blackwood stood in the middle of the street, flanked by his 2 men. All 3 were visibly drunk, with Blackwood swaying slightly as he faced Sheriff Davis on the jail's porch. "Time's up, Sheriff," Blackwood slurred. "I'm taking Jarrett now." "We had an agreement," Sheriff Davis replied calmly, his hand resting on his gun. 3 days. It's only been 2. "Agreements change," Blackwood sneered. "I've got new orders. The Phillips family is getting impatient." A small crowd had begun to gather, townsfolk drawn by the confrontation. Delilah noticed Beatrice Holloway. Among them, her expression a mixture of disapproval and fascination. "Stand down, Blackwood," Sheriff Davis warned. "You're drunk and making a mistake." Blackwood's hand moved to his gun. "Last chance, Sheriff. Step aside or this gets ugly." The tension in the street was palpable. Delilah held her breath, her heart pounding. She couldn't let this happen. Couldn't let Colt be taken by this man who clearly meant him harm. Just as the situation seemed about to explode into violence, the thunder of hooves broke the silence. A rider came galloping down the main street, his horse lathered with sweat and dust. "Matthew?" Delilah breathed in relief, recognizing Colt's brother. Matthew Jarrett pulled his exhausted horse to a stop between Blackwood and the jail. He was filthy from hard riding, his clothes torn and his face streaked with dirt. "I made it," he gasped, sliding from the saddle. "I've got the proof." Blackwood's face darkened. "Whatever you think you have, it won't matter." "It's Sarah Phillips's own statement," Matthew said, pulling a sealed envelope from inside his jacket. "Witnessed and notarized. She states clearly that she left town of her own free will, that Colt never took any money, and that her brother, Frank, drew first in that card game." "Let me see that," Sheriff Davis said, stepping forward. Matthew handed him the envelope. The sheriff broke the seal and read the contents carefully, then looked up with a satisfied expression. "This changes things, Blackwood," he said. "This directly contradicts the charges in your warrants." "I don't care," Blackwood snarled, his hand still on his gun. "I have orders to bring him back, and that's what I'm going to do." "Not today." A new voice said. All heads turned to see Colt standing on the jail porch, somehow free from his cell. He held a shotgun leveled at Blackwood. How did you— Blackwood began. Sheriff Davis isn't the only one with keys, Colt said calmly, and he's a smart man who knows when to bend the rules a little. The sheriff didn't look surprised to see Colt, merely stepping aside to give him room. You're making a mistake, Jarrett, Blackwood warned. No, you are, Colt replied. You're facing a sheriff, a man with legal evidence clearing me of your false charges, and a town full of witnesses who've just heard everything. You've lost, Blackwood. Go home. For a tense moment, Blackwood seemed ready to draw, despite the odds. Then slowly his hand moved away from his gun. The Phillips family won't forget this, he said bitterly. Tell them to read Sarah's statement, Matthew suggested. Tell them it's over. Blackwood spat in the dirt. Nothing's ever over, he muttered, but he gestured to his men to back down. They mounted their horses, and with one last venomous look, Colt rode out of town. The crowd began to disperse, murmuring among themselves. Beatrice Holloway lingered, her expression thoughtful as she watched Delilah emerge from the shadows and run to Colt. He set aside the shotgun to catch her in his arms, lifting her off her feet in a fierce embrace. You did it, Delilah said, laughing, through tears of relief. You're free. We did it, Colt corrected her, setting her down but keeping her close. All of us. Matthew approached, a tired smile on his face. Little brother, he said, extending his hand. Colt took it, then pulled him into a rough hug. Thank you, he said, his voice thick with emotion. For everything. What are brothers for? Matthew replied simply. Sheriff Davis cleared his throat. I'll wire the authorities in New Mexico with this new evidence, he said. Should clear things up officially. In the meantime, Mr. Jarrett, you're free to go. Thank you, Sheriff, Colt said sincerely, for giving us the time we needed, for bending those rules. Davis nodded. Sometimes the law needs a little help finding. Justice? He tipped his hat to Delilah. Mrs. Mercer, I expect this means we'll be seeing more of Mr. Jarrett around town. Delilah smiled up at Colt. Yes, Sheriff, I believe you will. Back at the ranch, Maria had prepared a celebration dinner. The mood was joyous as they sat around the table. Delilah, Colt, Matthew, and even Thomas, who had finally warmed to Colt over the past weeks. To family, Delilah toasted, raising her glass. Old and new. 2 second chances, Colt added, his eyes never leaving hers. After dinner, Colt suggested a walk to Delilah. They strolled arm in arm toward the creek, where the cabin stood ready. For Matthew's stay. He's a good man, your brother, Delilah observed. You're lucky to have him. I am, Colt agreed. I spent too long pushing people away, thinking I was protecting them. All I was really doing was running from connection, from the risk of loss. They stopped by the creek where moonlight danced on the rippling water. Colt turned to face Delilah, taking both her hands in his. These past weeks have changed me, he said quietly. You've changed me, shown me that there are things worth staying for, worth fighting for. You've changed me too, Delilah replied. Before you came, I was just existing, not living, hiding behind my widow's weeds and letting the town define who I was. Colt reached up to touch her face gently. And who are you, Delilah Mercer? Who do you want to be? Delilah leaned into his touch. I want to be a woman who lives on her own terms, who loves deeply and without fear, who builds something new instead of clinging to the past. And what are we building, you and I? Colt asked, his voice husky with emotion. A life, Delilah said simply. A home, a family, perhaps, someday. Colt's eyes darkened with intensity. I want all of that with you. But there's something I need to ask first. To Delilah's surprise, he lowered himself to one knee, still holding her hands. I don't have a ring, he said apologetically. I don't have much of anything to offer except myself. But if you'll have me, Delilah Mercer, I want to be your husband, to stand by you through whatever comes for all the days we have. Tears filled Delilah's eyes. Yes, she whispered. Yes, Colt Jarrett. I'll marry you. He rose and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with all the passion and promise of their future together. The wedding took place 3 weeks later, on a perfect autumn day. The ceremony was held on the ranch under an arch of wildflowers similar to those Delilah had once scattered on Richard's grave. To everyone's surprise, most of the town turned out for the occasion. Even Beatrice Holloway attended, bringing a hand-stitched quilt as a wedding gift. I may have misjudged you both, she admitted to Delilah before the ceremony. The way you stood by each other, well, it's clear this is more than just scandal. It's love. Delilah, radiant in a simple ivory dress, accepted the gift with grace. Thank you, Beatrice. That means a lot. Matthew stood as Colt's best man, their reconciliation complete. Thomas gave Delilah away, proud as a father despite his initial reservations about Colt. The vows were simple and heartfelt. When Sheriff Davis, who was officiating, pronounced them husband and wife, cheers erupted from the gathered crowd. At the reception afterward, Colt pulled Delilah aside for a moment of privacy. "Happy?" he asked, his eyes bright with joy. "More than I ever thought." "Possible," she replied, reaching up to straighten his tie. "And you? Any regrets about staying?" Colt shook his head. "Not one. This is where I belong, with you." "Even with all the responsibilities of the ranch," Delilah teased. "All those cattle to manage, fences to mend?" "Even with Beatrice Holloway's social calls and town gossip," Colt assured her with a grin. "It's all worth it for you." They rejoined the celebration, accepting congratulations and well wishes from people who had once whispered behind Delilah's back. The past was healing, making way for their future. As evening fell, lanterns were lit around the yard, and music played for dancing. Colt led Delilah onto the makeshift dance floor for their first dance as husband and wife. "I never thought I'd dance at my own wedding," he admitted as they swayed together. "There will be many firsts for us," Delilah promised, "many new memories to make." From the edge of the gathering, Matthew watched his brother with a contented smile. He had decided to stay in Marrow Bend, at least for a while. The Jarrett brothers were considering buying adjacent land to expand the Mercer Ranch, now the Jarrett Ranch, making it one of the largest operations in the territory. As the music played and the stars appeared overhead, Delilah rested her head on Colt's shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart against hers. "Remember that day with the Coyotes," she murmured. "When you said I was lucky you were passing by." "I remember," Colt said, his arms tightening around her. "I think we were both lucky that day," Delilah said. "Both of us lost in our own ways, both needing someone to show us the way home." Colt kissed her forehead tenderly. "You are my home, Delilah Jarrett. Wherever you are, that's where I belong." As they danced beneath the stars, the ghosts of their pasts finally laid to rest, Delilah and Colt embraced their second chance at love. A love born of rescue and healing, of standing together against threats both external and internal, of choosing to stay when it would have been easier to run. The hills beyond Marrow Bend still echoed with the lonesome wind and occasional cries of coyotes. But now, in the ranch house that had once felt so empty, there was warmth and laughter, and the promise of many years to come. And when spring arrived, Delilah and Colt rode out together to scatter wildflower seeds, not on a grave but across the land they now shared, planting beauty for the future they would build together. In the small town of Marrow Bend, people still talked, but now they spoke of the widow who found love again and the drifter who finally stopped running. They spoke of second chances, of redemption, and of the courage it takes to build something that breathes when the past has left you holding only ashes. For Delilah and Colt Jarrett, that courage had made all the difference. The end.